Hello everyone, welcome to another amazing video. If you enjoy the content, I ask that you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming parts and new videos. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's video. Are you ready? Let's go.
He responded with a sad expression on his face that he wasn't doing well. The injuries were really deep. But fortunately, he had the level of a king. Otherwise, he would have already been expelled. Song Lan opened his eyes and asked with a trembling voice why they suddenly came. Wang Jin approached him with a package and said with a smile that they brought breakfast for them, and he could eat it. Lin Yuan looked away and thought that in the battle with Yuan Li, not only Song Lan's body was defeated but also his spirit. His damaged pride wouldn't allow him to live in peace, and he would start doubting his abilities. No one would help him here. Only by facing himself in a struggle could he realize the value of life. Wang Jin took a bite of the sandwich and said that today Lin Yuan would definitely get revenge for them. Zhao Ming and Song Lan looked in their direction, confused, wondering what was happening. Wang Jin told them that in 12 days he had never lost, and that's all for today's fight. Zhao Ming asked him, with an astonished expression on his face, when he became so strong. Song Lan was wide-eyed, surprised for a moment, after which he decided to speak with a threatening expression on his face. That even though Yuan Li used techniques last time, he doesn't think that's all he is capable of. He should be careful. Lin Yuan was saddened by the situation and thanked him for his advice, after which he confidently said he would not lose. Sometime later, at noon, many people gathered again at Arena number 3, anticipating an incredibly interesting fight. They shouted and gathered their thoughts before the fight. Wang Jin sat in the front row, but when he saw an unfamiliar guy, he was surprised and asked who was standing there. The guy stood on the edge of the viewing area and observed what was happening in the arena. Yuan Li entered the field and waved to the sky. At that moment, Lin Yuan approached him and said that even Wo Xiangu was here. It seems that this fight is very important for the hunters. Yuan Li shouted angrily that he just wants to see how he will be quickly destroyed. Lin Yuan looked curiously up and locked eyes with Wo Xiangu, who was watching what was happening. Suddenly, Yuan Li started shouting, turning his back and putting his hands on his waist. Today, everyone gathered to watch the fights between him and Lin Yuan. They want to know who is stronger. Yuan Li pointed at himself and shouted with a sinister expression that he could say right now that he would be the winner. Then he pointed at Lin Yuan and shouted that he would be the last to dare to cross the hunter's path. Lin Yuan looked at his antics with a calm expression, said nothing. Wo Xiangu applauded afterward and shouted with a smile on his face that it wasn't bad. Zhao Ming got angry, clenched his fist and shouted why the hell he thought he would defeat Lin Yuan. This is too much. Wang Jin grabbed him by the shoulder and asked him to calm down, with a smile on his face. They sat back down, and suddenly someone approached them and said that many hunters had come this time, so he decided to show his devotion to Wo Xiangu. The guys turned cautiously to look at him and found that Wang Lin had approached them, asking with a smile if they minded if he sat next to them. Wang Jin was astonished at the question and replied that, of course, he could sit with them. He didn't think he would come here too. Wang Lin said that he had bet 10 million on Lin Yuan. Naturally, he came to watch this fight. Wang Jin was surprised and asked if it wasn't too much, if he wasn't afraid of losing. At that moment, Zhao Ming realized that the guy had a lot of money. Wang Lin asked if they organized bets. He had enough time to earn extra money, and then he would bet all the money on Lin Yuan. Wang Jin realized the guy was doing the right thing and took his share. Zhao Ming looked down and said, they should only see how confident he is. Wang Lin replied that Wo Xiangu also made a lot of noise, and at the same time, settled in front of the organization members. In the end, after Chu Tianyi expressed support for Lin Yuan, he became the most desired target. He hopes that this won't affect him too much. Wo Xiangu stands up and observes what was happening in the arena, with a look and a smile on his face. Wang Lin thought that he really wanted to see how Wo Xiangu would react if Yuan Li lost. At that moment, a battle started between the rivals, and Yuan Li shouted with a threatening look, transformed into a huge monkey, and shouted that in this battle he would break Lin Yuan's bones one by one until he knelt in front of him and began begging for mercy. He began to roar loudly and thrash his arms and legs everywhere, making a lot of noise. Many sparks from the transformation flashed around him, and he shouted to show what he was capable of. Lin Yuan still didn't transform and stared intently at the huge monkey that appeared right in front of him. He continued to watch him threateningly, and suddenly his eyes widened. He cast a fusion spell and transformed into a huge monster and roared. He stood in front of the monkey for a moment, and suddenly, the monkey jumped quickly and began advancing toward him, opening its mouth. Lin Yuan quickly realized what was happening, but at that moment, Yuan Li touched his body, and a bright spark occurred between them. They collided with their powers, and suddenly, Yuan Li expressed fear on his face and realized it couldn't be. His punch was at the level of a 2-star king. At that moment, there was a loud click between them, and blood spurted. Lin Yuan opened his mouth, from which Yuan Li saw a bright light beam beginning to be directed towards him. Realizing that his conditions weren't good, he needed to change his position immediately. He moved away from Lin Yuan and managed to dodge the bright light beam Lin Yuan was about to destroy him with. Yuan Li paused, and dust clouds flew near his body due to a powerful blow from Lin Yuan. He was scared, and thought he was in a terrible situation, that everything was happening too fast. He opened his mouth in shock, and at the same moment, a light beam from Lin Yuan's mouth was heading towards him. He was scared, and wondered if this was happening again. After which he tried to quickly jump from his position, but a bright light beam illuminated the entire area and hit him directly, although not directly as he managed to shield himself. No one would have thought, Yuan Li wondered with a terrified expression, he thinks he can deal with him just with this ability. How naive. He began advancing head-on with Lin Yuan's attack and realized he had not a scratch. He was absorbing most of the energy, and if this continued, it wouldn't last long. Lin Yuan continued to attack him with a bright light beam, but Yuan Li held up the blow and defended himself with his shield. Zhao Ming wondered surprised. Yuan Li endured Lin Yuan's attack. How did that happen? Lin Yuan continued to attack him with all his strength, but suddenly, the bright yellow light turned blue, and after a loud sound, Lin Yuan began emitting bluish magic. Everything lit up with bright light beams, and Yuan Li, with scared and horrified eyes, realized it was nuclear energy. But before he had time to conclude this thought, he was destroyed by an incredible surge of energy. The blow hit his chest precisely, and he roared loudly in pain before being thrown aside, a huge stream of blood pouring from his mouth. Lin Yuan stopped, continuing to observe what was happening, and at that moment, Yuan Li fell to the ground with a crash. Wang Jin, Zhao Ming, and Wang Lin, who were stunned by what was happening, and at the same time, very happy, and Wo Xiangu, in turn, became cautious, and with a somber expression asked how this happened. Zhao Ming pointed his finger at Yuan Li and began shouting, "Wow!" and then asked, when did Lin Yuan become so strong? From incredible joy, he hugged Wang Jin, who replied that he didn't know. He had always been like that. Zhao Ming continued to shout, "Yuan Li is no match for him. It's a pity that someone's bet didn't work out." Wang Lin told them not to rejoice too early because he didn't think everything would be so easy. Yuan Li stood up, taking a heavy step, and admitted that Lin Yuan had exceeded all his expectations. He was surrounded by a huge column of dust. Afterward, he touched his wound on his face and said threateningly, "It means I can play seriously with you." After these words, he ran towards Lin Yuan, who once again abruptly opened his mouth as a defense and began emitting magical light, causing stone fragments to fly everywhere. Yuan Li jumped high and advanced towards him, shouting for him to die. He made many sudden movements that illuminated the entire area with a bright light. Lin Yuan touched his approaching hand and tried to stop his attack with his own strength. After that, Yuan Li retreated a bit but reminded him that he has hands. He raised his bloody hand and said that the taste of blood is not bad at all, is it? After asking the question, he delivered a fierce blow to Lin Yuan's body, causing a lot of blood to be spilled, and Lin Yuan roared. Lin Yuan was defeated, and blood was pouring from his body. Yuan Li saw this and shouted with joy and pleasure, claiming that this was just the beginning. After these words, Yuan Li suddenly started running. Lin Yuan noticed this and became alert, after which Yuan Li delivered another fierce blow to him, and his blood was spilled again. Lin Yuan jumped in place, and Yuan Li observed his behavior from afar with a smile on his face. Suddenly, Lin Yuan's teeth became visible in his mouth. He laughed, and Yuan Li wondered with a somber expression if he still had the strength to laugh. Lin Yuan became furious, clasped his claws together, causing an intense glow. He told Yuan Li that he wasn't the only one who possessed artifacts. He raised his hands, and the entire area trembled with magical waves. Yuan Li was in a state of complete astonishment and thought, horror. He deliberately allowed him to approach to lure him into a trap. A moment later, a bright light beam was directed at him, exploding near his body and hitting him. Lin Yuan directed two of his fists and placed them on his enemy's shoulders, bringing him closer to the ground. His body began to glow with a bright light. After this, he abruptly lifted his head, looking up, and opened his mouth again. He directed a bright light beam at Yuan Li, who in turn began to scream in fear, pleading for him not to do this. But Lin Yuan shouted back that he would be finished. A moment later, he attacked his opponent with incredible force and completely destroyed him. The entire area was filled with a bright blue color. Wang Jin, Wang Lin, and Zhao Ming opened their mouths in surprise, and at the same time they all saw Yuan Li defeated, lying motionless in a pool of blood. Lin Yuan stared at his body, and a lot of dust formed around the battle site. After this, Yuan Li said with a trembling voice that he hadn't lost yet, but he couldn't finish that sentence. Suddenly, Lin Yuan said with joy in his eyes that since he hadn't lost, then let him allow him to continue. Yuan Li tried to get up from the ground, but his entire body was shaking, and he was completely exhausted. He asked loudly, "What does he want to achieve with this?" Lin Yuan shouted back at him that he wants to do to him the same thing he did to Zhao Ming and Song Lan at that time. He opened his mouth again and continued his attack, making Yuan Li scream with the sudden continuation of the fight and his pain. Suddenly, the entire area turned a bright red color. Yuan Li was completely defeated and fell to the ground again, experiencing incredible pain. The people around were surprised by this turn of events, and someone started shouting, "Lin Yuan is really a cruel guy. This is how Yuan Li should be treated. Let him have what he deserves." A girl covered her mouth with pity and watched Yuan Li's suffering with a scared expression on her face. Another guy shouted, clenching his fist in anger, "Honestly, it's about time he learned a lesson. The hunters are the weak point of the academy. Well done, Yuan Li." Lin Yuan stopped his attacks and asked his opponent, "Is he giving up? This is the only way to stop his suffering. Otherwise, he might as well forget about the national competitions." Yuan Li remained silent for a while, then suddenly started shouting and asked, "Lin Yuan, what does he think he's doing?" Lin Yuan opened his mouth and shouted back, "He's just behaving as he did at that moment." At that instant, screams and discussions were interrupted by Wu Xuan, who shouted, "Lin Yuan, he shouldn't exaggerate what's happening." Wang Lin, who approached him from behind with Wang Jin and Zhao Ming, shouted at him with a question, "Did he go too far? There's not much respect for them, the hunters, who hold places on the ranking list and do as they please." Wu Xuan turned to him with a smile, after which he mockingly cleaned his ears and shouted the question, "Who gave the word to the loser?" Wang Lin became irritated and shouted at him, but Wu Xuan paid no attention and shouted with a threatening look, "When Lin Yuan? He should think carefully if he really needs enemies in the form of hunters." At that moment, a bright beam of light appeared behind him. He extended his arms and used his powers. Lin Yuan waved at him and asked if there was a misunderstanding between them. Wu Xuan looked at him surprised and asked if there was a misunderstanding. Lin Yuan confidently replied, "Yes," declaring a long-standing war against their despicable organization. After these words, the people around opened their mouths in surprise, as no one expected to hear such humiliating words directed at the hunters. Wang Lin smiled, and Wang Jin and Zhao Ming supported their friend by shouting for him. Wu Xuan became angry and shouted a question, "Do you understand what you're saying right now?" The judge asked, "What's that noise? He hasn't announced the end of the fight yet, so they shouldn't complain about being expelled from the venue. The fight continues." Lin Yuan turned around and realized that this is legal. The judge was a beast soul at the lord level. Yuan Li stood up and asked him with a trembling voice and an ironic smile if he really wanted him to give up. He laughed and shouted, making a sudden hand movement, "He must listen. There are no more limits. Let him come and kill him." He was so angry that he opened his mouth as wide as he could and finally shouted, "Yuan Li is not afraid of death." After these words, a bright, magical beam immediately flew in his direction, piercing him. Yuan Li fell to the ground with a roar. He turned back into a human. His whole body was covered in abrasions and blood. He looked at the sky, and at that moment, people began to shout, "This simply cannot happen. Lin Yuan won. He really won." Lin Yuan looked at Yuan Li's prostrate body with a serious and thoughtful expression. The judge announced that the winner of today's duel is Lin Yuan. Wu Xuan became furious when he realized this and shouted at him to remember that the day will come to settle the scores. He licked his bloody finger and glared at him with fury. After some time, Long appeared and was very happy with his victory, saying, "He defeated the king-level beast and received the golden chest." Lin Yuan saw it, and with a smile on his face said, "How great, he has another golden chest at this moment." Zhao Ming and Wang Jin ran up to him shouting for joy. Zhao Ming had never thought he was so amazing. Wang Jin also smiled at him. Wang Lin also approached and told him he should be more careful because Wu Xuan won't just let this slide. He is the kind of person who won't stop until he achieves his goal. He asked who Lin Yuan thinks will be sent next. Wang Lin, with hands on his belt, replied that it will probably be Li Qing'an. Lin Yuan asked why him, while Wu Xuan and Shen Kang hold higher positions compared to him. The current ranking table looks like this. Chu Tiani is in first place, Shen Kang is in second, Wu Xuan is in third, and Li Qing'an is in fourth. Wang Lin, with a smirk, answered that Wu Xuan is at the top of the hunters list, so he values himself like no one else. Challenging him to a duel is almost impossible. He definitely won't send Shen Kang unless it's absolutely necessary, so only Li Qing'an is left. Lin Yuan looked into the distance and said, "So be it." He looked at Wang Jin and asked if he has any information about him. Wang Jin replied that he will definitely find out if it's necessary and not just about him. Wang Lin said they could also not waste time and ask him directly. He used to fight with him. Zhao Ming asked who won last time. Wang Jin replied with a smile, speaking as if he hadn't seen the ranking table. Zhao Ming scratched his head and laughed, embarrassed. After that, Wang Lin spread his hands and said naturally he lost. As Qing'an is not only incredibly strong, but his beast soul is also extremely eccentric. Lin Yuan asked what he meant by those words. He approached them and asked if they had heard about the plant soul in the observation room. One of the university staff was watching what was happening on the computer. Director Wang Ting entered and said, "This is a truly spectacular duel." This man was a judge. He turned sharply and asked the surprised dean how he ended up there. He replied that he was just watching the fight. Lin Yuan is not so bad. The judge agreed, saying he was quite experienced, ruthless, and decisive, which is lacking in most students. Wang Ting asked if his ability had reached the E rank. The judge scratched his head and exclaimed exactly, but he had a thought that the information was incorrect. The strength he showed is at least S or SS rank. Speaking of which, he should know a little about the hunters recently. They have become more aggressive, taken over the ranking table, and continue to press the rest of the disciples. There are complaints. Wang Ting replied that he understood everything, but Wu Xuan did not violate a single rule of the academy. His approach also corresponds to their motto. Students can feel the injustice. That's quite natural. The world is cruel in its essence. These kids still don't know the pressure people face every day, and the further they go, the more it will happen in their lives. Lin Yuan entered the cultivation room, and the system greeted him, calling him Freshman Lin Yuan, ranked number 18 on the list. Upon updating his qualifications, he now had a 50% discount for the high-level training room. The procedure would take no more than 5 minutes. He looked inside the room and said, "Cool. Now it's clear why everyone is striving so hard to reach the top of the ranking table." Long, who was beside him, told him to open the chest faster. He sat on the floor and opened it with a satisfied expression on his face, then showed it with joy. Wow, 50,000 evolution points, and a king-level artifact. Lin Yuan noticed a shiny object above him and wondered what it was. Long replied that it's a crystal that accumulates energy. And when the owner's attack reaches maximum energy in the crystal, it becomes 50% more powerful. Additionally, the owner can pour their own energy into it. He can try it now, and he replied, "Okay." Then shouted the word fusion and transformed into a monster. This is a worthy place for cultivation, similar to a four-dimensional space. In his paw was the same luminous object that began making loud sounds and shone in blue. After a moment there was some kind of change in it, and Long spoke with joy as the object was full. Lin Yuan replied that it consumed almost half of all his energy and more than half an hour to fill such a small stone. It will be almost impossible to recharge it in battle. He brought this object to his chest and continued to ponder. Long replied, saying its use is well reflected in the preliminary preparation. If used in combination with nuclear breathing, it can cause devastating damage. Lin Yuan picked up the storage talisman and agreed that's exactly it. Long continued to inform him repeatedly, successful absorption, obtained 1,000 evolution points. Lin Yuan sat silently on the floor, in the lotus position, with bright magical sparks around him. Suddenly he heard some sound, and with Long he was surprised. They looked to the side, and he pressed the button, making Wang Jin appear in front of him. Wang Jin looked around and said, "Wow, he settled in well. They're using an advanced cultivation room, all with earned money. Now he's not in the mood for jokes, as expected." Li Qing'an declared war on him, but he has a higher ranking, so he needs to be challenged. What will he do? Lin Yuan replied, "The fight cannot be refused after the victory over Yuan Lai. The rest of the hunters are watching him. By the way, he plans to continue making money with them." Wang Jin was very surprised by this and asked loudly if he wants to open bets again. Lin Yuan showed 2 fingers and said that this time he will bet 20 million on himself. Wang Jin was stunned by these numbers and asked incredulously if it was really 20 million. Then, he will bet 30 million. Lin Yuan looked at him with a smirk and asked if he's afraid of losing. Wang Jin clenched his fists and shouted that he has nothing to lose, believing he can win. He began to feel unwell and finally said, "The duel is scheduled for tomorrow at 7 in the evening. Until he goes and announces the opening of the bets, they will meet before the fight." Long smiled and asked if it was just his imagination, or if he never sighed while speaking. Lin Yuan took a deep breath and said they would leave it to him. He didn't think there would be a commotion similar to the last time the next day. On the second evening, Wang Jin ran quickly through the university grounds. People he knows tell him they don't believe Lin Yuan will win this time either. Anyway, Li Qing'an is ranked 4th on the list and also has an unusual plant soul, said another guy. Finally, there was someone who could defend the honor of the freshman. He began to cheer for Lin Yuan, and regardless of whether there was victory or defeat, he still bet 100 on Lin Yuan. How dare he say such a thing? Wang Jin clenched his fists and thought the current odds are 1.5. This shows that most people continue to be against Lin Yuan and his winning friend, and now their condition depends only on him. At that moment, Lin Yuan came out to meet him on the street, waved his hand, and apologized for making him wait. Wang Jin approached, caught his breath a bit and said, "That's amazing. The duel starts at 7 and he trained until 6:30. Well, training never hurt anyone." Wang Jin turned sharply and said, "He really has no equal in this. Go. They need to get to the arena a little earlier." Lin Yuan asked to run and eat first since he hadn't had dinner yet. Wang Jin opened his mouth in shock and asked in fear what he said. "Academy, 3rd canteen, 2nd building." They sat at a small table and ordered a lot of food. Lin Yuan asked why he suddenly decided to pay the bill. "Did you take the wrong pills today?" Wang Jin replied back, "All this is nonsense. He bet all the money on him, so he should eat quietly. The more he eats, the stronger he'll be in the duel." Lin Yuan continued to talk and chew at the same time. He is the dean's son, but he pretends he has no money. Wang Jin retorted with a smile, "That's not the point. Money from your dad and money you earned are 2 different things. He wants to show his dad that he's not a freeloader. Besides, he still doesn't know what kind of beast soul he has." Wang Jin looked away, embarrassed, and said hesitatingly, "He shouldn't ask about that. He'll find out everything on his own later." At night, first the arena. There were many people gathered in the arena. Lin Yuan approached and wondered, "Why are there so many people here?" Wang Jin smiled and replied, "Of course, this time he's against the 4th ranked on the list. Considering how exciting the fight against Yuan Lai was, it would be strange if fewer people came." They bumped fists, and Wang Jin told him to go in, and meanwhile, he would find Wang Lin and Zhao Ming. Lin Yuan agreed with him, but suddenly turned around when he realized something was wrong. It was Wu Xuan, who was in the same place as last time, watching him with a terrifying expression. Lin Yuan looked into his eyes with a slight smile on his face and thought he was going to destroy him. It's a pity he chose the wrong person for such a purpose. At that moment, Li Qing'an came out to meet him in the arena, walked confidently in his direction and asked, "Are you the one who defeated Yuan Lai? Honestly, you don't fit the role of his opponent very well." He adjusted his glasses with an arrogant expression on his face. Because Li Qing'an, he wants to give advice not to provoke unequal opponents in strength. Lin Yuan smiled and thanked him, but said that he didn't need advice at that moment. The judge said, "Ladies and gentlemen, as everyone is gathered, he declares the duel open." Many people cheered in support of the guys, and at that moment, Lin Yuan used the unity spell, roaring loudly as he transformed into a beast. Li Qing'an smiled, took off his glasses and also shouted, "Unity," transforming into a monster with incredibly long shoots on his body. Lin Yuan extended his hands and lifted his gaze upward, after which he said, "This is nothing." His palm had sharp claws that shone with intense light and began making loud sounds. Everything around lit up with a bright light, and only many sparks were visible everywhere, allowing Lin Yuan to easily cut several of his shoots with his claws. Zhao Ming shouted with joy, barely holding Lin Yuan, saying he should keep his attack that way. Wang Lin, with a serious expression, said it was too early to celebrate. He was just preparing and evaluating all options. Li Qing'an's true strength lies in something completely different. At that moment, Li Qing'an's eyes glowed intensely, and Lin Yuan asked him if that was all he could do. More shoots began falling to the ground as Li Qing'an looked and said, "It seems he understood everything." He stopped, stood on the ground and said, "Now it's time to finish him." The monsters stood facing each other, and at that moment, long roots began to appear on the shoots under Lin Yuan's feet. People looked surprised and opened their mouths in shock as it began to sprout again. Lin Yuan watched carefully and pondered, with Wang Lin saying that one of Li Qing'an's abilities is regeneration. As long as he has enough energy, the root will sprout infinitely. The roots reappeared on his body, and he was completely renewed, with long roots beginning to intertwine over Lin Yuan's head. At that moment, Li Qing'an wished he would die screaming his name. Lin Yuan looked at the growing roots and wondered how he could kill him. Then, he opened his mouth and shot a bright blue ball that turned into a beam and shot directly at Li Qing'an. The crowd exclaimed, "Incredible! So many roots, and all destroyed. What kind of plant soul is this?" Li Qing'an begins to get angry and thinks that Lin Yuan made a fool of him in front of the audience, so he shouts that he is completely irritated. The black lizard mockingly asks if he has something new to show. Then, the demonic plant begins to produce even more roots and weaves, a dome with them over the black lizard, which watches with tension and says the situation is not the most optimistic. Lin Yuan would probably be unable to defend against such an attack. Zhao Ming immediately questions if he will fail and lose Wang Lin, explaining that he doesn't know. He had warned earlier, Li Qing'an had taken the advantage, and it wouldn't be easy to recover. Men exclaimed in fear, whether to warn or not, but it's hard to avoid something like this. Wang Jin closes his eyes tightly, clasps his hands and thinks excitedly. At this moment, the audience carefully watches the battle and exclaims about the same technique when many shots are sent from all sides. At this exact moment in Li Qing'an's arena, a black lizard is surrounded. She tries to destroy everything with her nuclear breath. The audience observes this and notes that even Lin Yuan will have to try, as one nuclear breath is not enough. At this exact moment, several roots attack the black lizard from behind. It realizes this when suddenly the rest of the roots begin to penetrate its body. Wang Jin looks horrified. "Why?" Li Qing'an asks. So, Lin Yuan is ready to beg for mercy. Lin Yuan does not respond, but he understands that the roots are sucking energy from his body. Here is Li Qing'an's second ability, energy absorption. The demonic plant loudly asks how he is. Lin Yuan should beg for mercy if he wants to save at least a drop of energy. But the black lizard smiles and replies that he hasn't achieved anything to ask for such a thing. Then, he swings his claws and begins to cut all the roots. Li Qing'an understands that neither long-range nor short-range attacks will help. Lin Yuan begins to roar loudly and then charges directly towards Li Qing'an suddenly. He stops right in front of him, widely opens his mouth where there is a bright blue ball. The demonic plant sees this and thinks relieved that this is the nuclear breath with which the black lizard defeated Yuan Lai. But Li Qing'an notes that it's a pity he already knows this technique. After this, Li Qing'an continues to release new roots that wrap around the body and then form a shield. At this moment, Lin Yuan unleashes a beam of nuclear breath, but Li Qing'an manages to launch this attack. The audience is surprised. What a deadly move with just his breath. Lin Yuan deserves the status of one of the talented freshmen. Can a root shield block this? After a few moments, the attack ends in smoke, and small flames emanate from Li Qing'an's shield. He thinks he was lucky that an abundance of energy was put into this blow before it collided with the shield. However, he never expected the blow to still be powerful, but the victory is still his.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like the video. Thank you.